All right. Well, welcome. So we're going to sit for a while, and then maybe some other stuff will happen. And there will be mysterious music from some other part of the building. Um, so I would say, however you're sitting, it mainly, the ability to do it comfortably for an extended period of time mainly has to do with the play of your awareness with your body and with in particular of your posture, right? So whatever posture you're sitting in, at least for a moment, try and expand your awareness to take in the whole body. You can do it either as a scan or as, as points of interest pop up. Like, I don't know, for me right now, it's my right knee for some reason. But just to bring your awareness to as much of your body and your posture as possible. And the idea is to not so much relax, but comfort in some ways as much of your body as you can possibly take in, so that you're aware of how it is, you're aware of how the joints and muscles are in your body, and aware of any imbalances that might be happening just as a result of having just sat down. And you don't have to fidget with them, but it's worth, if you notice that something feels out of balance, bring your attention to it carefully, and when it makes sense, maybe in some deliberate and considered way, shifting it so that it's more comfortable. And you'll find, I think, that it's useful to do that kind of continuously, right? So while you're sitting, typically there's this sort of cycle where sometimes you're thinking, sometimes you're connected to your body and your experience. And in those moments, to really do this, to attend to your whole posture and your whole sensorium, right? To take it all in, and to meet it in a way that's skillful and that promotes comfort and a kind of aliveness, basically liveliness. That's in the in the parlance of Japanese Soto Zen, that's called shikantaza, which again is sometimes translated as just sitting, but you could easily translate it as always be sitting, or always be fully engaged in the activity of sitting. Mm-hmm. And with respect to the breath, it's the same thing. To be aware of the activity of breathing in a way that doesn't lay down any requirements or measurements around it, just brings awareness to it. And that can be difficult because there's this dynamic relationship between sort of awareness and control, right? So just to know that sometimes happens, and pay attention to it. Notice if you're trying to force your breath into some other mode. Notice if you're trying to slow it down or speed it up. Just let all that be the way it is. and let yourself breathe as fully and sort of restfully as you can. We sit with our eyes open and our gaze wide and expansive and relaxed. So eyes just resting here, but taking in as much of the periphery as possible, taking in the light, not so much looking as just seeing. And with respect to all the senses, not so much listening, but just hearing. Not so much attending to exactly, but just experiencing the shape and disposition of all the parts of your body. Hmm. So with that set up, let's sit for a while and see what happens. It's easy when you're sitting to fall into um, judging your experience or rating it or evaluating it. And of course, it's natural because that's what we do all the livelong day. You might find yourself thinking, well, everyone at least some of the time finds himself thinking, wait, is this the right way to do this? Or something about, when is something going to happen? Yeah. This period of Zazen is choose one, better or worse than the last one, or choose one, better or worse than, you know, a root canal. Mm. But interestingly, the request of it is different from that. The guy that founded the Japanese Soto Zen School that I'm a part of said, this is not about learning anything or getting something. It's the Dharma gate of ease and joy. Mm. Well, so the question is it possible to watch those impulses to rate or examine or categorize or evaluate your experience and instead to just take it in and enjoy it? This is the miraculous arising of a human life in this body, in this mind, in this moment, of all the bodies and minds and moments of the world. This is unique and singular and amazing. Just to let it be what it is. Even the thoughts around rating or evaluating, just to notice how they work. Just to stay as close to the process as you can. And when you discover that you've been tangled up in thought, return to that without recrimination or evaluation. Just literally take it in without judgment. And see what arises then. Hmm. So let's maybe stretch out a little bit since we've been sitting for 35 minutes or so. So why don't you keep your body upright. The next out breath, just look over your left shoulder really all the way. Try and keep your neck straight. All right, back to the center. And then next out breath, look over your right shoulder. All right, and then back to center. And then place your right hand up here a little past the crown of your head, maybe with your palm on the crown of your head. Stretch your elbow out to the right and then gently pull your head down towards your right shoulder. Really, really gently. Don't strain it. Just let it rest there. Feel the stretch in the left side of your neck. And then put your palm under your right temple and press your head back up. And then the other side. Place your left palm on the crown of your head. Wrap your hand around and gently pull your head towards your left shoulder. Feel the stretch open up all the way down the right side of your neck, all the way down into your arm, maybe even all the way to your fingers. And then gently push your head straight back up. Okay, and now put your right palm on your left knee. Wrap your left arm around behind your back. And again, twist, keeping your back straight. And again, look over your left shoulder. And back to the center. Relax for a second. And then the other side. Left palm on the right knee. Right arm wrapped around your back. Twist upright to the right and look over your right shoulder. And back into the center. And then with your back straight, just turn towards your right knee and bend over your right knee. Not super far, just as far as is comfortable. Keep your back straight. Keep your head and your neck long. You can feel a stretch in your left hip, maybe. And then upright and do the same thing on the other side. So turn towards your left knee. Keep your back straight again. Lengthen your neck and then bend gently, slowly towards your left knee. All right. So, does anyone, before we move on to the next thing, does anyone have any questions about practice, sitting, what we were just doing, any of the stuff I said, Buddhism in general, Zen in general? I don't know. There's a koan, I think, where somebody says, some monk asks the teacher one of the standard questions, like maybe it's, what is Buddha? And teacher says, it's the price of rice in Luling, which is this town near where their monastery was, basically. So if you have any questions about the price of rice, even, it's okay, right? Anything? Well, good. So, it seems like Buddhists love lists, and they've been making lists both in India, Central Asia, China, Japan, and all the way here. Just making list after list, right? There's even a book of them, and it's honestly, it's about this thick. It just starts with one, and goes up to, I don't know, 47 or something like that, and it has all the lists in it, right? And one of the ones that has 4 in it, which is it's from pretty early Buddhist literature. The in Sanskrit, they're called the 4 Brahma Viharas, right? Which means, as far as I can tell, the abodes of Brahma, or maybe the holy abodes, right? So, interestingly, in Chinese, they're called something slightly different, and it's kind of part of what I want to talk about. In Chinese, they're called the 4. Well, people translate this in lots of different ways. Some people say infinite, some people say boundless or whatever, but it's really, the word is it's a pair of characters that's a compound that means essentially immeasurable. There's the character mu, or actually in Chinese wu, which means like not, or don't even think about it, right? And liao, which means measurement, right? So in some ways, it's more like immeasurable, right? And that has this resonance with the one of the Mahayana, one of the primary pieces of the Mahayana liturgical canon, is the Bodhisattva vow, right? And in the Bodhisattva vow, one of the things it says is Dharma gates are immeasurable in exactly the same way, using these same characters, and I vow to enter all of them, which is, again, it's a sort of, an infinite proposition. They're totally beyond measurement, and there are infinitely many of them, but they're also, they run from infinitely small to infinitely large, and in any case beyond how we conventionally measure things, right? So that sounds a little bit like what we were talking about with respect to Zazen, right? So the 4 Brahma Viharas, or the 4 immeasurable. The last character in the Chinese name is mind, so it's the 4 immeasurable minds, right? or measureless minds, are loving kindness, which in Sanskrit is metta, right? And compassion, which in Sanskrit is karuna, mudita, which is sympathetic joy, and equanimity, which is called upekkha, right? So I was going to particularly talk about sympathetic joy, or mudita. But all of them have a similar flavor, right? They all arise out of this idea of having a mind that's without boundaries, measurements, categories, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a marvelous text from the Pali Canon called the Metta Sutta, which is about the Brahma Vihara of metta, loving kindness, and it says this is what you should be like. You should be strenuous, upright, and sincere, without pride, easily contented and joyous, not concerned with the things of the world, wise but not puffed up, and don't even wish for riches and great things, even for your family, right? and then it goes on, and it later on it says, with a boundless mind, you should cherish all living things, suffusing love over the entire world. Right. Um, the I think what these are pointing at, all these qualities are pointing at, is that they're the they're the analog of various emotional qualities that we recognize. Love, appreciation, um, uh, you know, kindness, and so on and so forth. Maybe um, comfort, right? But they're the unconditioned versions of those things, right? They're the ones that manifest without, so the typical, in the typical formulation, the near enemy, as a emotional quality of mudita, sympathetic joy, is pride, right? So, and then it mentions it in the Metta Sutta, right? You should be without pride. So, to be proud is to be conditionally joyful, right? To be grateful often is people say, I'm grateful for this thing, right? So there's a condition, or a measurement, you know it involves membership in a category or whatever, right? Some sort of calculation, and in the world of human sociality, we cut that stuff pretty fine, right? We're like, um, our often our feelings about the other beings, and people in particular, are based on a whole number of calculations and shades of um, shades of measurement, right? People attached to other people out of um, among other things, what they think those other people can do for them or should do for them, or um, something about how they are, attractive or powerful, or often offer gateways um, to better stuff that we want, whatever, right, et cetera, all of that stuff. The and so those are when you hold up the conditioned version of say, um, uh, having joy in somebody else's experience, and the unconditioned version, they're they're similar and yet different, and again, their pride and the conditioned form of joy in somebody else's happiness or experience is considered the near enemy um, of the unconditioned version. And why is that, right? Well, it's because it's exactly what we were talking about earlier on when we were sitting, right? Um, the when the founder of San Francisco Zen Center, Suzuki Roshi, wrote his sort of most famous book, the foreword pretty much explains all of this. He says, the problem, there's this perception that practice is hard, that Zen practice is hard, that meditation practice is hard, but it's not. People generally aren't clear on why that's true, right? he says it's not true because it's hard to meditate, even though it can be hard to meditate, right? Um, it's it's not true even because it's hard to quote get enlightened, right? To have experiences that demonstrate something surprising and different about the realm of human experience, right? He says what's hard is that this mind that we have, the mind of self-construction, categorization, judgment, measurement, and and the resultant grasping and aversion for, grasping after things that we measure to be valuable or desirable, averting from the things that we consider valueless or undesirable, right? Um, it's because that gets tangled up with everything that we do, right? Including meditation practice. And in the end, that becomes a barrier to the the fundamental experience that meditation practice offers, which is this um, kind of unconditioned appreciation of just being alive and being full of the sensations, perceptions, and mental formations that constitute a human life, basically. Um, and okay, so what good is that, right? That's the next question. And what good it is that mind that well, as as they say in the Metta Sutta, that boundless mind, right? Um, which is always present in our body. It's just that we don't often notice it because of our other preoccupations. But that mind can act as a counterweight to and a kind of container for our everyday human cognitive activity in a way that's tremendously useful, right? And tremendously comforting, right? Um, it allows us to meet the world in a way that isn't completely governed by habit, right? That isn't completely governed by um, all those calculations, right? Which is wonderful, right? And so when you talk about mudita, it's sympathetic joy. It's a kind of manifestation of unconditioned love, right? Um, of of yeah, of unconditioned love, and it can apply anywhere um, to anyone, but it's helpful when we can apply it to the people near us in order to bring kind of comfort and delight into each other's lives, right? That's what practice is for. There was a time in the history of Buddhism, as far as we can tell from the scholarship, where the function of practice was, again, to bring this sort of comfort and delight into the life of the practitioner. But in the end, it was to help them, uh, you know, clean up their karma so that they were delivered from the round of existence, birth and death, and so on. By the time Buddhism gets to China, um, that isn't so much of a thing, right? And instead, the emphasis shifted to how can people live together comfortably and skillfully in a way that brings them joy and satisfaction, right, and delight, right? That keeps their minds lively and flexible, right? And the ability to practice in this way and bring forth these qualities, an ability to apply loving kindness and compassion to even difficult situations, right? The ability to delight in the happiness of even people that we don't really, in an objective way, like very much, etc. And to be equanimous even when things are hard, and things will inevitably be hard. And equanimity is a great thing to be able to bring to that difficulty, right? So, any questions about that before we go on? Any thoughts, comments? Well, what time is it now? Yeah. So we've got a little more time. What do you want to do? You want to sit some more? Let's do it. Dude?
I actually have a question.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but you were mentioning how, the mind, you're often, or not you, but, one is often.
No, me too.
Against, certain proclivities of the mind for like self-interest
Mm-hmm,
or
yeah.
distraction. And I'm kind of just wondering, how I guess if there's a state, if you're trying to achieve a state that kind of goes beyond those or has tendencies that aren't those,
Mm-hmm, yeah.
then why are those roadblocks put up in the first place?
Well, it's an interesting question, right? Like if you look at the sort of explanatory parts of the Buddhist literature, right? What you discover is that the basic idea behind, going back thousands of years, right? All of a sudden, sometime roughly 500 BC, everybody in the world was like, wow, we humans are really screwing things up, right? And making each other miserable, and we need to figure out why. And so all these philosophical schemes and religions and other things like that sort of arose around this time that were all intended to, one, explain, and two, propose solutions to to this really super obvious problem, right? And if you look at the most ancient literatures of the world, what they're really about is how people are screwing up, and they're pointing at the ways in which that happens. Their explanations are different. Like if you look at the Iliad and the Odyssey, that's a pile of suffering in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the reason put forward is that the gods didn't like a few things that some people did, right? But the thing that's unique about the Buddhist explanation and proposed solution is that the Buddhist explanation says, if you really dig into it, it says that those tendencies that we have to suffer in this way, right? In this particular way, to judge life unsatisfactory, and to constantly be navigating in this way that involves sort of grasping and aversion and so on and so forth, right? Those things are part of the operation of our greatest gifts as humans, right? Like, what do you think our greatest gifts are? Compared to, let's say, banana slugs and I don't know, cheetahs and blue whales, right? What do we have that they don't, right? Right.
The ability to, well, the mind and ability to expand knowledge.
Yeah, that's good, right? What about another one? Something else?
I guess advance our own development.
Yeah.
More deliberately.
Yeah, all of that. No, that's correct. I mean, I would say that if you look at humans, our greatest gifts are, first of all, we have this very complex symbolicated language, which, I mean, clearly lots of animals communicate and communicate in sophisticated ways, but our language is pretty rich and sophisticated, right? And probably way more rich and sophisticated than, for example, the language of a banana slug, right? And then the next one is a couple of the things that you were saying are sort of related to this. It has to do with long range planning. We do a pretty decent job of long range planning. We're not great at it, right? The things we mess up a lot, but nonetheless we're okay at it. And I've probably told a lot of people this story at least once, but I used to read this guy's papers. He was a neuroscientist at UW, and he did all his work on banana slugs because it's really easy to find banana slugs in Seattle. And he wrote in one of his papers that banana slugs have all the earmarks of higher thought except an ability to do long range planning. They don't actually do much planning. They just they put their little feelers out there in the world. They notice a chemical gradient and they're like, oh, I'll go over there. And it works pretty good for a banana slug, right? We certainly have a lot of them in our house, right? So language, long range planning, and then we also have this just ridiculously rich and multi-layered sociality. I mean, there are lots of other social animals in the world, and they're often very successful, right? Like naked mole rats, termites, I don't know. But humans have this thing where we, I think for some reason, and some of it has to do probably with cultural development and some of it is probably physiological, but we have this capacity to build multi-layered socialities and apply the same kind of emotional weights to things like, my immediate family and my political party and I don't know, my, my some work-related organization, right? We're really amazing at that, actually, and we do it all the time, even without thinking of how sort of remarkable that is, right? And the thing about all these gifts is that they have certain requirements, and there's some complicated and difficult parts of them, right? So the main requirement is they all require that we build up a notion, a model, a complex model for ourselves, right? You can't do language the way we do language without that. You can't do long range planning the way we do long range planning without that. And our language and our capacity for planning and for navigating in the social environment, they're all tangled up together, right? They're not separate. They're just different aspects of essentially what people call the human condition, right? And so you can see how that's an issue, though. You construct this self, you animate it in the world, and you animate it using powerful emotional tags on all of our actions and speech, speech actions and actions in the world and thoughts and so on. And you can see how that could immediately go wrong, right? You have a person over here that wants something, and you have another person over here that wants the same thing, and you've got a conflict, right? Or et cetera, right? And so the what it comes down to then is that we're required to have these capacities because we're human and we don't want to be not human, right? And so then the question becomes how to live with and work with and use those capacities in a way that doesn't cause lots of suffering for ourselves and others, basically, right? And that's in the Buddhist framework, that's the function of practice, is to demonstrate and build a capacity for doing that. Does that make sense? Yeah. So in other words, it's built in. They're built into us, and the very things that the very capacities that cause us to suffer are also the gateway to relief from suffering, right? Basically. Yeah. But it's a good question, right? What else?
That last part seems like the most important in a way, right?
Yeah.
The enemy isn't the suffering.
Right. No, right. I mean, they're these are the only capacities we have, right? And they're not all bad, right? Like, the fact that we have richly symbolicated language and sociality, this rich sociality means that we write poetry. Poetry is great. Poetry is a marvel, right? The fact that you can write something that you speak it out of your mouth and it can slip an experience in unexpectedly over the transom of the hearer that causes a kind of this sets of this resonance between the speaker and the spoken to in this way. It's marvelous, right? It's beautiful. The and so when you look at the Zen literature, most of it is people talking to each other in this kind of surprisingly poetic and skillful way. And then every now and again you find somebody who doesn't do much talking, they just go around hitting people or something like that. But for the most part, it's people using language at a pretty high level of poetic skill and kind of poetic skill to kind of keep each other awake, right? There's one. Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of them, but I guess I'll mention one. So, these two guys that are hanging around a monastery, and one of them's sweeping, and the other one's sort of lounging around. And the guy that's lounging around says to the guy that's sweeping, he says, "You're really too busy." And the guy that was sweeping stops and he goes, "There's somebody that's not busy." And the other guy says, "Oh, I see. So you mean there's actually two moons?" And the sweeping guy holds up the broom and goes, "Which moon is this?" Right? I mean, that's pretty good, right? It's both kind of funny and lively, and also points directly at this the thing we're talking about, right? How do you be comfortable and skillful in the middle of activity and not, get so emotionally tangled up in it that you ignore everything, right? Good question. That you skip over something important, right? So yeah, that's right. Our capacities are the means whereby we can practice skillfully enough to relieve our suffering and the suffering of others, and it works pretty well, actually, right? It's the work of a lifetime, but it works pretty well. So,
kind of an open-ended question.
mm-hmm.
One of the things that resonates for me about Zen Buddhism, as opposed to some of the other strands of Buddhism, is the particular place of householders
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in practice, and sort of differentiating householders from monks.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be a very respected and sacred place for householders. And
Yeah.
For me, where this comes into play is sort of daily practice, and the role of maybe retreats
Mm-hmm.
seem to me often related to the monastic
Mm-hmm.
tradition. And for those of us maybe that have families and a life, parental responsibilities, the idea of like, I'm going to take 3 weeks off and go on a retreat, it's like, no, you're not. And the idea that you're going to take a whole weekend and devote it to a retreat of insight meditation.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm not. So I guess I'm just curious about your thoughts about the relationship between sort of the lack of a better word, the sort of householder tradition
Yeah.
of practicing Zen Buddhism versus the more monkish monastic, and
Yeah.
how that relates to the world that we live in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, so
And just
yeah.
preface that I've been in other Buddhist communities where it's all about what retreat are you going on,
Right.
or what weekend are you doing.
Yeah.
Which seemed to me to kind of place a higher value
Yeah.
on the monkish monastic traditions and less. And I find those kind of off-putting and don't resonate with.
Yeah.
Well.
No, I hear that. I mean, I have to say that there is a monasticentric strain in Western Buddhism as well, right? But I mean, so my entire experience of practice, going back even to the beginning, I was always working. Initially, I was playing in rock bands for a living, but I was still working, right? And I also had family, right? And to support and care for in one way or another, right? And it just got more and more elaborate over time, right? And so I've been able and occasionally to get away for, at one point I took a 3-month leave of absence from work and went off and stayed in a monastery for 3 months, which is great. But the idea that I could, like go off and spend 5 years in a monastery was, it was never a possibility. And I had to really carefully calibrate my engagement with retreats as well, for all the reasons that you're saying, right? I've done a bunch of retreats, but it hasn't been it hasn't been easy to do, and so on. And on the flip side of that, after it's sort of a complicated story, but at one point in my life, I was I became sort of, as a non-resident, I became sort of head monk at San Francisco Zen Center, the city center. And so I was there. My day was, I would get up in the morning. But at this point, I was living in San Francisco with my wife and 2 kids, and holding a house, right? And I would get up in the morning at about somewhere between 3:30 and 4. Get on my bike, ride to Zen Center, do a bunch of stuff, run around the building with a bell and wake everybody up. Somewhere in the middle there, I would stop in UN Plaza and grab a donut or something like that on the way to work on my bike. And then, we would sit, we would do ceremonial stuff, we'd have some meetings, and then I'd ride my bike to the train station, take the train to San Jose and work a full day. And then ride my bike to the train station, take the train home, ride home. And I would get home at about 9:30, and my family would have gone to bed and put a little tiny bowl of something on the table for me to eat, and I would eat it and go to bed. And so it was ridiculous. It was way too busy, right? But after that, my teacher said, "Okay, so now here's what you should do," because that's your sort of gateway to being a teacher, right? Is you do this head monk thing. After that, my teacher said, "Okay, here's what you need to do. You need to start up a group that you can sort of that fits your daily practice needs, and that you can use as a kind of springboard for that." And so after that, so for the last 15 or 16 years, I've been meeting with this group, not always the same group, but pretty much every weekday morning at a reasonable hour, right? And I would have thought that when I started this, I had no idea, but I would have thought that the results from the kind of I had no idea what the results of just sitting in a kind of straightforward, simple way every morning with a group of people would be. But it turns out it's amazing, right? And it's something that really can fit into your everyday life, right? So you have the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, right? And it doesn't have to be big, right? But it really does. Like, after 15 years of it, I look at how things are, and they're really, really different. And a lot of it just has to do with sitting down and sitting in this really kind of straightforward, unloaded fashion with not a lot of ceremony, and with a modest amount of intensity and so on. And every now and again I still do a retreat, but it's not that often, actually.
Even what you're describing, though,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be like Debbie Downer.
Yeah.
But I'm a single parent raising 2 kids because my ex-wife, for reasons, can't. So I'm not getting up in the morning. I'm getting my kids to school in the morning.
Yeah, totally.
And
I get that too.
Coming home late with someone leaving me a bowl of food, that would be the spouse.
Yeah.
I'm the person making
Yeah.
that dinner. So for
Yeah.
a Buddhist practice to work, it needs to have an account of those realities.
No, I totally get that.
And
Yeah.
I'm just saying, sometimes I find Buddhism doesn't speak very well. I think Zen Buddhism better to that. So
Yeah.
It's like, oh, just go in the morning and the late afternoon and do your Song Dynasty. Like, my kids got activities.
Yeah.
The activity in the morning, and I'm getting ready for school.
Yeah.
In the morning, so no, that's not even what. I'm just sort of explaining the reality.
No, I get it. Yeah. Yeah, I get it. I mean, I would say this, right? So for years, I helped run this program at Zen Center called EPP, which is short for Establishing the Path of Practice, right? And the idea was, it was a year program, and people would show up, kind of regularly, but a lot of it was sort of homework, right? And in the end, the primary function of the homework was to work out a way that you could fit practice into your life, regardless, working with the circumstances of your life, right? And people did remarkable things and kind of managed to do it, right? It didn't all look the same, right? And so there was this one woman who was a SFUSD school teacher and incredibly busy, and there was no way she could get up in the morning and do it, and there was no way she could sit down in the evening and do it, and so she figured out a way to fit short periods of practice into her regular schedule on a flexible basis based on what was happening with it year by year, right? And it was great for her, right? And there was also a social aspect of it and a sort of networking aspect of it that could happen in a number of different ways. But I agree that in order for Buddhism to be of any use, it needs to accommodate all sorts of lives, right? Because otherwise, it's just going to be this thing where, people either who can all go off and be monks or otherwise have their lives fixed so that it's possible to have some sort of hybrid scheme like mine are the only people that are going to be able to benefit from it, and that can't be correct, right? So my sense is it is possible to fit it into a wide variety of lives. It just is a matter of taking on the basic proposition, which is that you want to practice holding your everyday life in the context of this sort of larger picture of what it means to be human, basically, something like that. And doing it not in an intellectual way, but doing it in an experiential way. That's all. And you can do that a lot of different ways, right? So there's I don't know if you know Seital Wind. Do you ever run across those people? They were up in Grayton for a while. I think they're not really operating anymore, but because their teacher retired, and she was this Burmese woman, really amazing person, who really didn't go for seated meditation at all. And her entire program had to do with folding that activity that I was just describing into your life, whatever you're doing, right? And she had a bunch of people living there that were doing it, and then a sort of broader sangha that would study it and do the same thing, right? So anyway, that's another way of thinking about it, right? Yeah, it's a great point though, because honestly, again, if it's going to be beneficial, it has to be possible for people to use it directly, right? Yeah. Well, it was great. My God. Have a marvelous night. And thank you a lot for coming. Really, it was great.